And History Flights Productions, it's Flight Sim History, your free flight through Earth's digital twin. And today is U.S. Election Day. The polls closed an hour and a half ago, so I hope you voted. If not, you're agreeing to whatever happens. Today we're flying from D.C. to Butler, Pennsylvania, which is just a little bit north of Pittsburgh. And I'll be doing that in separate flights from Washington to Philadelphia, and then from Philadelphia to Butler. With a flyover of a semi-linear summary of the insane 3 months we've had since President Biden dropped his bid that could have global consequences, parallels in American history to the issues of our time that make these events seem less unprecedented, as Donald Trump would so eloquently say, and my analysis of likely events should that odious orange toad be Grover Clevelanded into a second term, or Kamala become the first black female president. While that gives away the gist of my opinion, disclaimers before I begin. 1, I will link sources in the description as soon as I am able after posting the archive on YouTube, also at History Flights Productions. Working a full-time job and constantly reading news to build this script for the past 3 months has been not easy at all as a one-person social media crew. 2, I would ask that you criticize the argument and not the person, as only constructive feedback with supporting evidence will be considered, not emotionally driven ad hominem attacks. And 3rd, this will not be a comprehensive deep dive on every potential impact of the election, as others have covered Project 2025, and how an administration will act will only start to become clear in my January livestream once the winner is declared. However, the transition threatens to not be smooth due to Trump refusing to sign ethics pledges and Harris doing so very late. With that out of the way, let's begin. I'm starting in my hometown of Washington, D.C., and I'll explain a little why I'm so passionate about politics and why you should care about what I have to say about the election. I wanted to be president when I was 5, so that colors my perception of Biden a little bit, I'll admit, since he was also raised Catholic, and wanted to be president when he was 5 too, according to one of his nuns. Until my mom got me a book on presidential assassinations, which might have been a blessing in disguise considering recent events. When I was 8, I cried after Gore had the election of 2000 stolen from him by the Supreme Court diktat because he promised to save the whales. Then wrote a book about all the biggest losers in the presidential elections up to that point. This is not quite the daytime conditions I initially wanted, but that's okay. I am getting the America we have right now at full throttle. Woo! Okay, so normally I do rely on the sound to judge how the plane's operating, but, well, I'm just gonna wing it, because I have no way to capture this audio output anyway, and it would be kind of distracting. So, fingers crossed, everybody, that I keep straight on the runway and can lift off very soon, even though I haven't played this game in a while. Whee! Okay, so, let's raise the landing gear. Staying in line with departure runway. Well, I went to American University about 10 years ago and graduated 10 years ago with a degree in political science and a minor in history, and I want to acknowledge the influence Dr. Alan Lichtman has had on me. He was a tough but fair grader in my History of American Conservatism class. I'm not sure about the scientific grounds for his 13 Keys to the White House or how predictive they actually are in the age of high polarization, but his videos buoyed my hope. Seems that I need to go this way, I think, in order to get to there. Let's see. Whoop, okay. Clearly I am going over the altitude ceiling. This probably is not the easiest game to stream like I thought it would be, but I'm just getting a... Oh, up. Airspeed is definitely a lot. Oh boy. Well, anyway, another fun fact about my life in this city is that I came here well before that, as part of a trip by my family to DC and Colonial Williamsburg in spring 2003, where I went for the first time to the... Okay, what is going on with you? Maybe I do need to lower the landing gear to... No, it wants me to retract it, but I think Can I set the flaps down? I forget how to do that. Because it's just buzzing constantly now. From something. Alright, well, it's going 100 nautical miles that way. So that's where I'm gonna go. Anyhow, throughout my life, my autism has meant that I've walked between two realities. And one of those is where I've seen the beauty of America and the hard work my family put in to get to where they are, and thrilled at the ingenuity of America, especially when I was 12 in DC talking about the history of the Wright Flyer and gathering a crowd around me. This wasn't the last time that this happened, as it also happened to me in 2007 in the Colosseum at Rome. On the other hand, I also recognize that I was fortunate to be white and still had to hide my neurodivergent, transgender, and pansexual sides. There's evidence to suggest that these are connected in autism more so than the general population. But even so, when I was coming out online, I was dehumanized for it and attacked in person 3 times in the past 2 years since I have done that. Yet I would have had to work a lot harder to overcome my obstacles and suffered more if I was a person of color and or had a womb and or had higher need support autism than I do, which is infuriating to me because it already feels like the world is kind of impossible with my low support needs autism sometimes, with all the many, many things that I have to do. Let's see. I don't know why that there. Okay. I don't know what exactly is going wrong with this. Probably need to cut back on engine speed a little bit. There we go. Because all I'm just getting is vibrations screaming at me right now. But, okay. Yeah, I'm just going to have the AI do this for a minute while I actually get to my points. So, this, along with the diverse family and friends that I love and who have stood beside me, has motivated my sincere desire to have a genuine discussion with everyone of goodwill, no matter what political background or faith, about workable solutions to help America live up to the best of our ideals, rather than constantly dwelling on angertainment politics. I want America to welcome huddled masses yearning to breathe free, and to be able to sing with pride that this land was made for you and me. I want my words to defend America's genuine striving for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness from sea to shining sea, while fighting to understand and then help cut out the legacies of slavery, robber barons, and its many other evils like tumors. I will tackle this issue for the rest of my life with broad, lowercase patriotism, which can both affirm my love for this country and its unique and fascinating constitution, and critique it while offering salves for the many, many wounds it has endured over the past 9 years of Trumpian chaos. For right now, though, let's try to keep our own house from burning down, then refurbish it. I'm doing the same thing for my mental health by trying not to talk about every single political impact this election could possibly have on election night. Really a misnomer, considering all the early voting and absentee voting. I mean, I voted a month early with mail-in ballots. Anyway, I can get more comprehensive once I'm free of this ridiculous news cycle, and with less legal shenanigans hopefully going on from the Trump team. Meanwhile, I am currently in a long-distance relationship with a brilliant, beautiful, and brave single mother from Eswatini, a country under an absolute monarch where women are not allowed to own property if they're not married or don't have a mature son. So even if there was any other Republican candidate than a deranged wannabe king and felon with no risk of Project 2025, and we still have Kamala running, I can't just vote for the candidate I would personally prefer. Not that Jill Stein is a quality candidate, having been propped up by spending by the Republican Party and disinformation from Russia, where she was seen palling around with Vladimir Putin, while also having a transphobic VP. Instead, I have to vote to keep America a free country where economic opportunity is easier to reach for a mixed-race family of 3, like the one I want someday with her. and to keep the planet livable for the boy I want to be my son someday and any children he, not the government, chooses to have. Therefore, please try to understand my perspective as I will attempt to do with yours and have a respect for each other as human beings while doing so, which is all too rare today. First, there's no denying it. Biden's debate performance on June 27th was bad. The presidency ages you. Look at any picture of Abraham Lincoln before and after the Civil War, or at Obama's hair, and tell me you can't see the difference. A lot of the stumbles in the debate, however, can be explained by Biden's lifelong stutter, and the names he forgets is a disability too, called aphasia. These can be exacerbated by age, but he isn't the first person the GOP has disparaged with ableism, as it infuriated me when Dr. Oz insinuated in the 2022 midterms that John Fetterman was getting answers fed to him in debates because of the necessary captioning accommodations for his auditory processing disorder after his stroke. And honestly, the transcript was better if only people had read it, with correct things said at the wrong volume. But people don't read this kind of thing anymore, just as how television viewers in 1960 talked about JFK winning the debate and Richard Milhouse Nixon won with radio listeners. I don't know, I just liked his middle name anyway. Let me just, also move this map around. Like a little element. I cannot wait for Flight Sim 2024 to make some of this stuff a little easier. But yeah, I'm just... Oh. Why is it taking me the wrong way? At least it seems like that. Okay. Did I go the wrong way? Because it feels like maybe I did. Nope, I'm going the right way. As you can see, I'm just... Oh, wow. There is not a lot of distance to travel at all. At all, to Philly by plane. No wonder it's a popular airplane destination. But I went there by train, and I'll get to there in a second. But basically, people are ignoring that he signed COVID stimulus, passed the largest bipartisan infrastructure bill in U.S. history, created new investment in semiconductor manufacturing in the U.S., passed the largest ever bill tackling climate change while also capping insulin prices for Medicare and not adding to the deficit, cut child poverty in half virtually overnight, declared Juneteenth a national holiday, regained the prestige of NATO in supporting Ukraine to beat back Russia. Even though right now it's a stalemate, we have to keep it up as long as it takes to prevent Russia from invading NATO and triggering World War III. Has been shoring up our defenses in the Pacific with our allies, our greatest national security assets. So it's annoying that Trump has been disparaging them. To deter China from attacking Taiwan and wrecking most of the world's supply of semiconductor chips in the process. Got Brittany Griner out of Russia, and so many more that there's an entire subreddit called What Biden Has Done. However, the Senate was getting by on tiebreaker votes from Vice President Harris at the time, and the demands of Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who has now effectively surrendered West Virginia to MAGA out of spite over not getting his way every time. Who cares about climate change when you have a houseboat, he must be thinking. Slowed Biden's agenda tremendously. This is a feature of our government, not a bug, but no one thought this would be so challenging, or that challenges would come so quickly either. So Biden had to propose the most ambitious bills since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. Ironic, given his domestic agenda was also undermined by an unpopular war. In gigantic log-rolling bills containing multiple topics at once that sounded bland or nebulous, like the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, or the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. A boring name for our first gun control legislation in 30 freaking years. And will take a long time to actually make an impact. Most of his executive actions were pressing the undo button repeatedly on Trump's impulse to break the civil service to his will, just as Trump controlled Z'd Obama's orders. Meanwhile, eggs, cars, and housing inflated, and that can seem easy to dismiss them, even though these things are all true, by saying, well, the president doesn't control the economy, or the Federal Reserve is independent. Until you're making close to the poverty line, your friend was just laid off at a plant, and you have to think about expenses, and possibly crushing debt. In that case, talk of corporate price gouging, which is a part of, but not the whole reason for inflation, sounds like highfalutin $10 word excuse-making by the Beltway. I had hoped Biden would stay in, but then quit in 2026. Under the 22nd Amendment, that would still have allowed Kamala to run for 2 full terms of her own. 10 years of President Harris's leadership is unlikely, since 3 terms of the same party hasn't happened since Reagan to H.W. Bush from 1980 to 1992, but would enable her to finish what Biden started. I also didn't want to think about her "don't come here" remarks played on a loop, but she was the best option in the limited field of post-Biden options, because as I predicted at the time, she makes sense for the party to get behind. And she can make the case that she can carry out her predecessor's policies and perhaps more forcefully communicate their benefits without sounding like a policy seminar. To those who say Kamala is a prosecutor, so she can't possibly be progressive enough for you, pretty much all the other black female politicians Biden considered had activist moments that looked like too radical, as I read in the book This Will Not Pass. Kamala had her critics during her time as a prosecutor, but that background was a plus for the Biden team to fend off veiled racism. Things like DEI hire that they're bandying about now on top of the usual electability and likability deficits for female politicians. About qualifications and radical views as much as possible. To make it about qualifications as much as possible. This included Karen Bass, even though I get her argument that she was reaching out to people believing differently than her, since anything to do with Scientology is toxic after the celebrity conversion wave of the 2000s led to the death of Jet Travolta, an unforgivable offense to autistic people like me. And let's not forget its brutal past of going after suppressive persons, basically any dissenter, anti-psychiatry stances. I had a professor who spouted anti-psychiatry. It is wackadoo. And shady tax deals. Ironically, for how much editorial handwriting the media did over every little Biden mistake, they continue to sane-wash Trump and basically handed him the first debate by allowing him to never answer a single question, which is part of why I was reading less of the Washington Post even before Jeff Bezos made canceling easy. So why do this? Part of it is Trump is such a whiny baby that he walks out of the room. So how are you supposed to stop that? They also know, however, that by artificially keeping the race close in the false sort of pure objectivity, they get people to tune in. And by relying on polls that are using useless waiting to hedge for their jobs, they could get him to program against for this whole year minimum. Maybe another 4 if CNN gets to spar with King Trump to get ratings, if they don't get thrown in prison or executed in live military tribunals, as the man threatened on Truth Social for 4 years. I'd like to note that I and many other pro-Biden commentators never told anyone to shut up about their concerns about his age and fall in line. I also still think that Biden was the best candidate we had, and that from a political science standpoint, replacing him is a reactionary and historically unprecedented risk, since replacing incumbents months earlier in the race in both 1952 and 1968 ended badly. 1968 might not have been so bad. Uh-oh. What is going on with my Microsoft Flight Simulator? That's not great. Okay, there we go. That was weird. It paused for a second. Okay. But a Redditor, who is named Hit to Restart 1989 said to me, "Hey, I know it wasn't everyone. You're right. The argument for Biden staying was always a legitimate opinion, even if it differed from my own. Where it got murky and dangerously divisive was when either side tried to convince the other that they weren't entitled to their own opinion, and voicing it to the representatives was some sort of betrayal. That's neither here nor there anymore. Now we just move forward at Mach 10 in a single direction. Once the convention produces a nominee, which we did in record time. I'm proud of us. Even if Democrats were in disarray for a while there. Let me just make sure I have the right location for my plane, because I might already be close to... Yeah, I think I'm almost past Baltimore now. Goodness. This is flying by. But as I approach Philadelphia, put yourself in July 4th, 2024. I had never thought to take a trip to Philadelphia, actually, but now that I had finally recovered from my divorce, a year later, I finally did take a train, for a long weekend with my autistic best friend. I'll call him Brian Cannon. No relation to Judge Eileen. He's a secular Jewish man and was someone who worked in Republican politics up through 2012. And moderates like him, are probably, or like he was before he became independent, are 20% of all Republicans and probably voted for Nikki Haley in the primary, so are very gettable for Harris. When Nikki's donors shifted to Biden to prevent Trumpian dictatorial chaos from destroying their business environment, and Republicans from Dick Cheney to several former Trump administration officials endorsed Kamala Harris, that's not the biggest swing in the world. Just remember when trying to persuade someone in a traditionally conservative area, try not to yell/assume they're mega idiots who have been lost to literal brainwashing or whatever. Try to appeal to what Joe Biden has done connected to concerns that are close to home for them, such as healthcare, and explain how the country is improving, albeit slowly, and how Kamala will build on that. I'm betting that many Nikki Haley Republicans supported Trump because they liked his tax cuts, not his antics. So we should be trying to persuade anyone we can. It's also not fair to paint all older people as Republican. My Nana was greatest generation and campaigned for McGovern in 1972. She said she was going to vote for Hillary in 2016 before she died in February that year and absolutely would have voted for Biden. On her final hospital bed, the nurses put on Fox News because they assumed, and even though she was intubated, she shook her head no. She was a Massachusetts Irish Catholic Democrat and passed liberal values on to her children, including my mom. I also wish I could have told her all the things, good and bad, that have happened since then and gotten her reactions. Some of her reactions to 2015 Trump were priceless. I also think she was very tolerant and would have absolutely accepted my gender transition. Anyway, the point is liberal boomers do exist, and they don't want their Social Security cut, and older voters tend to vote more. It's also irresponsible to assume that the sour mood in the media reflects everything about this country, because when I arrived at the city of brotherly love, I found Americans celebrating our nation's birthday by City Hall with peaceful National Guardsmen. I also found a greasy and hard-to-eat regional sandwich that was still a delight to try in the city that made them famous. Nights restoring my patriotic feelings about American history by rewatching the National Treasure movies with my best friend. A cute African girl I met online who promised to stay in touch and might be the love of my life. And brutal hate! Brian and I walked for 6 miles to try and find open restaurants, and it was a good thing we brought water because I have never sweated that much in my entire life. Philadelphia already has a muggy climate, which is why it was the center of the yellow fever epidemic of 1793, which caused George Washington and the rest of the federal government at the time to flee, as it was so tiny they could do nothing after the city government collapsed into mayor-run committees, with the, of course, unacknowledged assistance of the Free African Society. But we are currently at 1.1 degrees of climate change. So imagine it getting closer to 2 by the end of the Trump administration if you hate the heat waves as they are now. As I fly over the rail capital of the world and realize that we are still very far away from high-speed rail, and I'm emitting virtual carbon into the air with my virtual plane, as well as probably drawing out the electricity grid with my fancy next-gen console. Well, current gen, because it doesn't have any freaking games. But anyway, we had a little bit of a hard time getting into the Independence Hall or Liberty Bell tourist attractions. Oh, Newcastle, cool. So I think they both suffer from over tourism, but I had a better time with the underground ruins of Benjamin Franklin's house anyway. And that's where I got this Join or Die shirt. This is his first ever political cartoon, the nation's first ever political cartoon. And it's about the 13 colonies uniting to defend themselves against France during this the 7 Years' War of 1754 to 1763. But it could very easily apply to us now because we are so divided, and I'll get into that later. Did you also know that he was Philadelphia's largest landlord? It's true, but unlike that went to the ground, excuse me. But unlike the modern robber barons, Zuck, Bezos, and Musk, he invested his wealth into libraries, the fire department, the post office, and so much more, having had to run paper routes for himself after running away from his brother in Boston. We also went to the Constitution Center, where Kamala totally ripped that felon apart like a dang good prosecutor, where there was a dramatic retelling of the events leading up to the Constitution signing by an impassioned presenter. It came back to one thing. The framers did not want a king at all. Whoops, that's not what I want. Can I get out of here? Okay. There we go. Okay, well, I'm almost in Philly. And let's see. No. Can you not? Thanks. I wanted to get a daytime map of the city, but I appear to be closing in a few nautical miles, so I will be very vigilant for that. That looks very airporty. Anyway, the framers didn't want a king. They also created great harm due to the 3/5 rule that counted black people that way in order to reduce Southern representation, which they would have had if non-voters had been counted as full people, which stands in contradiction to Legal Eagle's otherwise excellent video about getting rid of the Electoral College, claiming that the 3/5 rule increased Southern representation from 0. They also acted in ignorance and greed by betraying their few Indian allies, breaking one-sided treaties signed under duress. Yet their immortal words created an unstoppable drive for freedom in a country where an Italian from Apulia could move to Philly and open Murph's, the best Irish place in the country, in my opinion. And I'm 16% Irish, according to the company I stupidly gave my DNA to, so I'm 16% right. Therefore, we should also keep in mind that in the preamble, no matter what we do, we're only guaranteed the pursuit of happiness, not actual happiness. What I support is democratic socialism, which doesn't necessarily end free enterprise, but allows for more worker cooperatives like the kind I'm seeing in the creator space with the streaming service Nebula, which splits profits 50-50 with a creator pool by watch time. It also uses the awesome power of government primarily to check that of corporations, not civil rights such as reproductive freedom. It needs to be practically implemented with legislation over time because our Constitution checks and balances make everything slow. If being practical makes me a centrist according to overlay online leftists, then I'm okay with being a practical centrist. If not, winning ideals. What the Republicans support is a big, clunky, techno-feudal government with Silicon Valley lords controlling our data, our ability to cancel subscriptions now that the FTC's click-to-cancel rule has been canceled by a Trump judge, and the prices we pay for everything while they kiss the reign of a techno-king ruling through fear and violence. Meanwhile, I don't think they could pass a federal abortion ban, but they would certainly make it harder to access mifepristone and the like through the enforcement of a zombie law called the Comstock Act of 1873, which this would prevent it from being shipped in interstate commerce. And since most commerce is that way and is the province of the federal government, that would be a real problem. Then states might start hounding people fleeing to places where they can actually make reproductive decisions without the involvement of a bunch of men. And while we still have open internal borders thanks to Article 4 of the Constitution, they would still try to basically exile people who left, which would be very hard for women who are not white and not of means. This is the same way they tried to make it legal to catch slaves who fled to the north. That was also a part of Article 4 of the Constitution. Just goes to show you the duality of America. But even though a Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1793, it was only stringently enforced with the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. As slavery was the issue that divided a house against itself as abortion does now, united women to fight for the rights at Seneca Falls in 1848 with only one black person in attendance named Frederick Douglass, and even created the Republican Party in an abolitionist fervor out of the remnants of the Whigs and the Know-Nothing Party that hated Catholics and immigrants so much they somehow got ex-President Millard Fillmore, Maryland, in 1856. A state literally named after St. Mary. However, getting their states invaded by deputized hooligans paid for by their taxes that sometimes even took free black people and put them into slavery they had never experienced was what fired up a lot of previously apathetic Northerners against slavery. 11 years and one bleeding Kansas later, that turned into civil war between the federal army and various state militias playing pretend. That kind of war would be over in a matter of months rather than 4 years, transitioning into years of counterinsurgency operations most likely, if the federal government under President Harris brought its full might to bear. But if Trump is president and passes an extradition bill, are we prepared for the West Virginia National Guard to march into Maryland and stand off with their National Guard? Is our delicate, largely truck-based food supply ready for roads to be destroyed? Are bounty hunters going to kidnap women at night because their pregnancy is being monitored and they left for a free state? The fact I have to think about these things as realistic possibilities from what I know of history, politics, and how wars are waged weighs on me very heavily. I'll go back to it happened here situation soon, but a lot of the policy has already been discussed by people more knowledgeable than me. The problem is that Trump just loves the blood sport. Hang on. Of media coverage, and enjoys acting aggressively towards the press. Let's see. Can the AI also land the plane for me? That would be nice. If so, but probably not. Okay, so... Wow, look at that. I really did enjoy the nights in Philadelphia, even if they were muggy. Let's try to turn in a little bit. It's hard to see so many landmarks right now on this side of the river, but okay. Biden does do messaging at a lower volume because he's focused on actually doing his job, which presidents used to care about instead of just lying around and watching TV all day while governing by tweet. At minimum, that kind of behavior sets an example that laziness in leadership at the top is okay because the guy fell asleep at his own freaking criminal trial. That's the one time you want to be awake. And that a federal employee's oath to the Constitution doesn't matter because an insurrectionist who broke that oath is in charge. I can't completely excuse Kamala's lack of substance when talking about economic policies that might impact my future, such as how she's going to keep grocery store prices down without cutting food production and pay for her $6,000 newborn credit and $25,000 down payment assistance. I would really love that because my parents had a house at my age, 32, and I'm paying half my after-tax income to rent when it should be 30%. I also think that silencing people who have policy concerns by calling them nerds, looking at you as you trade quality for quantity yourself, Pod Save America, isn't the way to unity. Instead, vote for her because we know that Trump will be worse on everything, then press her on the policy when she gets in. Of course, whatever his half-assed Trump policies are, Trump will primarily undo as much of the legal apparatus that he thinks is out to get him as possible, including by firing special counsel Jack Smith, pardoning himself and the January 6th terrorists, and, let me just try and turn in a little bit more towards Philly, because I think I'm in Camden and I overshot. That is totally understandable, though, because it is a very gloomy night over there. Nah, just kidding. Okay. I have got to go to the main menu and try again with this daytime stuff. Because I'm not very familiar with flying this plane for sure. And I don't want to have to rely on the AI for everything because it just sends your plane flying in a straight line. So, let's pick this instead. Something like, well, okay. Maybe I do get another AI flight from, because I thought that, oh, I might have overshot the time as well. Hang on. Okay. From Philly to Pittsburgh, but then I'm gonna divert north and just kind of keep going around there. Let's see. Look, he wants to undo this legal apparatus because he thinks the law is out to get him because they are for him breaking the law. And he will fire Jack Smith, pardon himself, got the federal civil service in purges against LGBTQ people and dissenters using Schedule F. And even if he's frustrated by the courts and Congress, whose permission he would need to suspend habeas corpus and randomly arrest people left and right as happened in the Civil War, I doubt that will happen. And even Lincoln was called a tyrant for it. So, still, though, Trump can and has in the past leveraged the bully pulpit. This is a term coined by Teddy Roosevelt in his speeches against the big trusts of the Gilded Age as he prepared to break them up. But in this case, leveraging both his personality on Truth Social and Twitter, I refuse to call it X after Elon mussed it up. There is still a very real danger of collusion there, though, with his million-dollar lotteries. It's basically he would try to use the FCC's power against media he doesn't like by attempting to revoke broadcast licenses. He can't do this against entire organizations in one fell swoop, but can against affiliates one by one, which concerns me. Scaremongering perfectly normal health care for imprisoned trans people to cancel the new Title IX rules Biden passed to protect trans people, as if prisoners or trans people in general should be treated like animals in cages. Up an incredible can of worms in the middle of this freaking election. And if Trump wins, I know from talking to a few veteran friends of mine that after the Veterans Riot of 1783 against George Washington over unpaid salaries and pensions that was diffused peacefully, the military's commitment is and always has been to the Constitution of the United States, as it has been since our nation's founding. That means that most troops won't fulfill any unconstitutional orders either. Not that they even could logistically deport 12 million people or lock down every Democratic city. But if Trump just keeps pushing them to shoot protesters and the like, the worst case scenario for me is that he installs generals who are yes men rushed through a Republican Senate after mass resignations, or makes them acting indefinitely, as he did with the heads of many civilian agencies, and we have a military dictatorship, as in Trump run one. Or two, the Joint Chiefs, with the cabinet full of yes men who refuse to do the 25th Amendment, and Congress reduced to a rubber stamp parliament, decide to drag Trump out of the White House like how the judges in the Judge Dredd comics of 2000 AD attacked President Robert Booth when he nuked the world. Because whether they're immune to the law or not, the president can legally do that without talking to anyone except the Secretary of Defense. Ugh. And he flees or gets arrested and we have a military dictatorship. The likelihood of either happening is extremely low, but not infeasible or impossible. I'm also betting that greater than 90% of the National Guard would side with President Biden and arrest any violent MAGA protesters descending on D.C. If, let's see, okay. I'm just gonna point this plane in the right direction and then have the AI take over the flight. Oh my gosh, I am so rusty at this game. I need to get into Flight Simulator 2024. If I have any hope of making non-political history content that's entertaining, perhaps for kids. I want this to talk about relevant current events for sure, but I want this show to be more than that. Anyway, okay. Alright, you figure it out. AI, please. Oh, no. You know what I think it is, too, is that there might be slight input delay. I don't think this is a huge deal with a slow game like this, but there's definitely some noticeable delay since I've been playing simulators since 2004 with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2004 A Century of Flight. I'm just glad I didn't try to do this in the right flyer. That thing just loves to pitch the nose down and only completed a minute of real flight anyway. I don't think we'll have a repeat of January 6th, is what I'm saying. The image of troops outside the Capitol and every polling station for every election forever will damage our image as a global democracy. And the ballot fires in Oregon, Washington, and Arizona concern me, but the election infrastructure has figured out how to deal with this for the most part, so I'm hoping it'll be fine. And although the MAGA militias that do pop up either way will not be able to coordinate well and be easily defeated in pitched battles, it would take years to tame a low-level civil war against multiple factions such as the Proud Boys. A task far harder than defeating a single confederacy or even the later Ku Klux Klan. the terrorist activities of which is why the Enforcement Act of 1871 was passed, which was later used to prosecute the January 6th terrorists, Trump incorrectly calls political prisoners. In the meantime, either way, we would have regular shootings of civilians in what J.D. Vance has called the soft targets of elementary schools and places like grocery stores in Buffalo and churches in South Carolina and the like. This means the National Guardsmen will be set up to prevent terrorism in blue states. If Kamala wins, she'll probably need to do Reconstruction 2 electric boogaloo against white supremacist strongholds with greater enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, and the Enforcement Act, even with the gunning of restrictions on certain counties known to be discriminatory by the Supreme Court in 2013. Another one of their amazing rulings along the well-known Citizens United that opened the dark money pits. In the first Reconstruction, after years of Republicans' so-called carpetbaggers losing elections to Democrats due to the corruption of a handful of black politicians, exhaustion with the expensive reform, just as many people seem to be exhausted with Black Lives Matter messaging today, due to the Panic of 1872. And violence against polling places in the election of 1876 that suppressed new black voters, Republicans made a compromise to get the presidency after the election was tied 184 to 184 in the Electoral College, selling out civil rights to return when President Rutherford B. Hayes withdrew federal troops from the remaining Republican-controlled states of South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida. Now that Biden's gone, though, we do have a few more paths to victory other than the Midwestern blue wall states. Well, Tim Walz hasn't been able to reach rural Minnesota voters like we hoped, and I'm pretty sure a good chunk of Arab Americans in Dearborn will never vote for Kamala, because she's not going to publicly break with the president she serves in the middle of delicate negotiations amid the widening impossibility of a regional war. Harris has growing support among Latinos in the Sun Belt, black women in North Carolina, and Gen Z women of all ages who do not want to answer polls or anyone else about their uteruses. She also has 69% of black men, despite the rightfully concerning Trump is gaining among black men narrative. He is gaining with Gen Z men who listen mainly to podcast bros like Joe Rogan, but not enough to win by itself. So we've got to fight with all our might for Harris in these last hours, protect each other against election violence while the courts move along idiotic spam lawsuits, and hope she doesn't mess this up and lose the war to a younger and less toxic-sounding MAGA Republican like J.D. Vance, who made Trumpism almost seem like a coherent philosophy in the vice presidential debate in 2028. Well, I don't want her to lose to J.D. Vance or someone younger who still espouses Trumpism in 2028. We're going to be purging Trumpism from America by electoral defeat, which is the way to do that, for a decade, probably. But I've also got some rapid-fire answers to some of the questions that have dogged me, and my wonderful mother, who fought so hard to get me to this point and was a very capable assistant with her questions. Like, why is Trump tightening up when he hasn't done much else different from his usual hateful tirade, and everyone knows he's a convicted criminal, found liable as a rapist, etc.? Part of it is his stupidity and evil is baked into his personality at this point for many people. Part of it is junk polls with like 20 people from Republicans. Partially the polls can't tell the future, but they do tell you how people are feeling right now. Why don't people, knowing how wildly swinging our politics are based on a handful of seats in the Senate, vote more? The election being set on a Tuesday in November, back in a time when people were farming more and could take one day to take a horse and carriage into town to vote, are over. Those days are over. Even making Election Day a holiday might not work because it's not a 3-day weekend. But voting is getting easier after the pandemic, so easy in D.C. especially, that I could have easily dropped off my mail-in ballot at a drop box 10 minutes from my house by walking. However, the Republican taboo on mail-in voting is also decreasing, ironically reducing the red mirage of winning it first on Election Day before absentee ballots are counted. Why is that? Maybe to keep people from being discouraged by absentee results? I need to look into this further. That will diminish Trump's inevitable argument about the election being stolen because the man simply will never admit to losing. He did this in 2016 when he lost one primary to Ted Cruz. Said he was cheating. Said that he his dad killed JFK or something. It was so stupid. And he did this to Nikki Haley about the Vermont primary. That clearly anybody who beats him must be cheating. It's such an infuriating attitude. Admitting when you lose is an attitude I learned at age 8 in Little League. Partially Partially, it's all the stupid gerrymandering, which needs to be acknowledged in Democratic states, too, where fully 8 of 10 races in Maryland in 2022 had no Republicans or opponents of any kind. Partially, it's all the voter suppression based on imaginary fraud. The biggest fraud in American history was in Adams County, Ohio in 1912. And according to Slate, 1,679 people sold their votes for $25 a pop, or about $640 today, to support themselves. And when Judge A.Z. Blair cracked down hard on all of it, one woman walked 18 miles in the snow to turn herself in, having sold her vote to support her family. Including her disabled son, I believe, though I'll need to look that up and reconfirm that detail. Because that's important when researching anything, or investigating a claim from anybody. So how to get people to vote? Well, awareness the Constitution is under threat is a pretty good motivator. No one really talked about the emoluments clause, for instance, until Trump used his hotel in D.C. as an international money laundering front. And 2020 was the highest turnout ever at somewhere around 150 million people, which is about half the population, when it would sometimes be as low as a third, though I'm going to double check that, because part of the population is children, and I'm not great with math. Though, it is important to note that lowering the age to 18 in the 26th Amendment helped things. I think that the biggest reason to care about democracy is seeing changes. Like, if people just think that both parties are the same, I see some online comments about the uniparty that are so stupid, like everybody's just bought and paid for by lobbyists and stuff, then that just depresses turnout, because it's like if the rich people are just going to buy the election with billions and millions of dollars in PAC funding, why should I care? In Citizens United, corporations were essentially just treated as people who could have unlimited free speech rights and unlimited spending, which basically made campaign finance laws a joke for everybody but the little people. However, small dollar donations have really picked up over the years since they first started getting popular after Obama. Now more people are enthusiastically donating to Harris. I did $50 if I recall correctly. So when they see that she's raised $1 billion, they feel a part of that. This is all building on the positive momentum of 2020, though. Black women in Georgia delivered the Senate for us in 2020 and 2022, and Trump said this election is rigged anyway, so don't care about it. This shot himself in the ear, pun semi-intended, out of spite, because a Republican Senate would have frustrated Biden's agenda, but now we have a Democratic-controlled Senate. Can we get rid of the Electoral College already? Without a constitutional amendment, no. And that's very hard to pass because you need 2/3 of each chamber of Congress, and then 3/4 of states. So trying to get a consensus around that is very hard. That's why there's only been 27 amendments in our entire history. And one of them was so bad, the 18th Amendment, that the 21st Amendment literally just exists to repeal the other one. So they canceled each other out, and there are only 25 active amendments right now. The last one was dug up by a student, and it was apparently proposed, but then shelved, about Congress not being able to raise their own salaries before the next term, and that one was passed in 1992. Anyway, the Electoral College was never supposed to be democratic. It was supposed to be semi-democratic because the idea was that people in agrarian societies all around the North and South, who may not have been even able to read and would have a hard time getting newspapers about all the presidential candidates anyway, when it took 2 weeks by carriage to get from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C., the idea was that they would elect people that they trusted to go into the state capitol and be like, aha, this person is qualified. Then they would decide the race. However, it quickly became clear that the electors would not actually be independent like the framers originally intended, and eventually each state bound the electors' votes to the winner of the popular vote in the state, which was ruled constitutional by the Supreme Court. Faithless electors have been fined, though they do lead to cool moments like a Native American who got an electoral vote for the first time in 2016 in Washington state. Also, people who are wishing Bernie Sanders was president might be surprised to learn he got one electoral vote of Hawaii's 4 for some reason. The problem is then that by attempting to make the Electoral College more democratic, they inadvertently turn it into the Rotten Tomatoes of our election, because we don't really have a single election. We have 50 independent state elections that are then tallied up. So the best option that I've been advocating for and thinking of is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which is basically an agreement between states to allocate all their electoral votes to the winner of the National Popular Vote. With enough electoral votes, that would basically override let's stay connected. Oh boy. Well, just going to try to keep this guy steady then. Anyway. So, with enough electoral votes, they would be able to essentially abolish the Electoral College from the inside. They're allowed to do this as long as this compact is approved by Congress per Article 4. Currently, states with 209 total electoral votes, pretty much all Democratic strongholds, big surprise, have enacted this in their state laws because it's the state legislatures that decide how electoral votes are allocated in theory next election. If a Republican legislature wanted to, they could have just taken away the fact that the popular vote even appoints electors at all, and just have the state legislature do it. But Congress passed the Electoral Count Act after January 6th. Yes, the one that makes it so the vice president can't overturn the election either. That bans states from being able to do that within a certain time period before the election or after the election. Just so they can't just say, oh, we don't like the popular vote, we're just going to toss that out and appoint our own electors. Pending proposals have been made in Nevada, Michigan, Virginia, and North Carolina. So if you want the Electoral College chest bursted by a popular vote, then go use your First Amendment right to petition to the government for a redress of grievances. There are also a few states that could use some proposals like Pennsylvania, but even just all the past plus pending states and Arizona would get us there. We're the only advanced democracy that still has an electoral college, and every electoral college is never reflective of the popular vote, even when the winner is of both, and gives rural areas too much power. Of course, the counter-argument is that it would give cities too much power to get rid of it, though the counter-argument has been that it needs to counterbalance cities. It's a bit of a struggle, when there's only 6 swing states that get 80% of the ad dollars, it's hard to then argue that cities would be focused on too much because now certain states are focused on too much and don't get much information about the candidate. So things like going to New Jersey for the Republicans are usually very rare unless you're Trump and you're an idiot and you go to New York, have a racist comedian decide that Puerto Rico is an entire island of garbage. What? The fact that it was right inside New York meant that this couldn't be downplayed like it would be in a red state. That and all the trash the Trump supporters left behind. Let me just give the control back to the AI and make sure I know where I am. I'm not actually sure if I'm in the right place, but I feel like I'm approaching Pittsburgh pretty soon. Well, anyway. You get lots of really cool views of Pennsylvania. Look at all that amazing rural area that I haven't been to. That I can't predict how they're going to do, but it is pretty clear that Puerto Ricans are going to influence this election to some degree because there are 100,000 of them in Philadelphia, and that's a large population to piss off. As for the people who are doing the pissing off, if you're concerned that people aren't informed or they're only informed by one source, which is ironic to think about on this platform, TikTok, or even YouTube or Twitch, how can we prevent that sort of distortion of facts when there is freedom of speech? But misinformation and disinformation can be deadly. Well, one solution that Dominion Voting Systems implemented when Fox libeled them was to sue them for $787 million. Because guess what? In court, you still have to tell the truth. However, people don't usually have those resources, and too much information in general is a real problem. Back when my mom watched Mission Impossible every week with her siblings, there were only 3 TV channels. Now there are so many channels of information, and most of them are not even on TV anymore, or newspapers. And anyone can pick up a microphone and say whatever they want, including me. I'm going to make mistakes, because I'm one person and it is very difficult for me to balance digging through sources, filming the video, uploading it, deciding the thumbnail, etc. It's another full-time job, almost, sorting through the information environment when there's so many different things grabbing for people's attention. So it's hard to pay attention to the news other than the headlines for a lot of people. Really, we should try to set civil standards in society rather than wait for government action, but some government actions could include mandating the use of informational nutrition labels like YouTube does already. When there's a broadcast from Al Jazeera, for example, they disclaim that this is a news organization funded by the government of Qatar. They do this because anything that's government funded, like PBS, gets the same treatment. If we gave PBS a budget, that would be helpful because PBS was founded with the mission of education and nonpartisanship. Aside from the classic kids shows my sister and I watched that promoted rather than destroyed literacy, Washington Week in Review is still good. PBS NewsHour is still one of the highest rated news programs in the country for broadcast television. But that's part of the problem. People just don't watch broadcast TV anymore because they're streaming. I don't think that TikTok's ban is going to work either because of free speech, even if it is a Chinese-controlled propaganda site, which is not true, or at least hasn't been proven to be widespread. What we do need is to have more disclosures about how algorithms work in the first place, because these algorithms are so mysterious and somehow they know exactly what you want. Some people, including me, ended up finding community on TikTok and other places and realized, oh, I'm trans, and in part because there are other people on this site who are trans, who are talking about their experiences, and that's kind of interesting and terrifying at the same time. However, it also pushes all sorts of things such as AI-generated readouts of story subreddits. Meanwhile, YouTube can be thumbed on the scale by giant private corporations driven by the profit motive. In response to criticism that moderation on social media sites was too liberal and too easily suppressing of conservatives, instead of stating, we're just promoting facts here, Facebook decided to tilt its algorithm towards the conservative side to keep them happy. That's why it seems like every meme from some sort of place has some racist overtones or is for older people or AI generated. That is another problem. We need AI labels that require people when they make an AI image to say it's altered. I've dabbled in a couple of images just to see how the technology works. And as an infinite Rorschach test, as I escaped from under the influence of the mini-Trump I was married to for 6 freaking years. But the fact of the matter is that AI hallucinates, basically just the fancy tech word for make stuff up, even if it tries to get the information right. Because all it knows is what word is logically next based on this digestion of a lot of text. So people are getting pre-digested news all the time. It's gross, and with all these great image generators, people have been generating fake images of, say, Gaza. That doesn't mean there's not suffering or that every news report about that can be dismissed, but if you're only getting your information from TikTok, the algorithm is going to show you more of what you're searching for, which is traumatic images from the conflict. So it gets people into a loop, in a bubble, because they're only looking at the things that they want rather than something that disrupts that pattern but is factual. There are now kids who are going to college and have never read a full novel, which is stunning. It's not necessarily that they're not reading at all, but their reading stamina is just low due to the lack of phonics education and the evils of whole language learning that have basically just surrendered to clips and newspapers and stuff like that and said, well, we're going to give people text that they actually encounter in real life to get them to read. Well, I never would have read Great Expectations if I hadn't been assigned it in high school. I'm glad I did, even if I didn't like it. Anyway, so even my reading stamina has been lowered because of news. So after Stepmom Kamala tells us it's time to turn off the Trump show and go to bed, I'm cutting all that down and going back to books. I have such a pile of books and movies and video games that I really want to tackle. But anyway, I'm also going to get higher quality news instead of grabby headlines. Those are things like The Economist, The New Yorker, and Semaphore, which is a free newsletter that can tell you so much about the world, but that goes into an email box where everything is piled high with spam and stuff like that. People are overwhelmed with information, and so it's about promoting higher quality information, partially. It's also about taking the dang phones away in classrooms. It seems like 70% of schools are at least in support of some sort of ban if they haven't already done that. And some parents were like super concerned about that because what if there's school shootings and stuff? If there's a school shooting, do you really want somebody talking at all anyway? And shouldn't there just be less guns? I think that would solve a lot of problems. And then speaking of news, well, I didn't quite make it to Butler, but I do need to fly over here. Because like a burnt shadow on its many destroyed walls, Gaza looms over everything. Well, day's just arriving, but it's been another tragic night probably in this endless and stupid war. Anyway. So, I've flown over here before for my first episode of this, because I wanted to see if there was any practical solutions to getting aid in without government slowness. That was understandable, but also kind of frustrating. And so, unfortunately, a week after that, World Central Kitchen was bombed. This is the issue that has given me the most anxiety this election, other than the prospect of being lavender scared and, like, my civil rights taken away by Project 2025. As a trans person, despite my own reassurances that probably won't lead to me getting tossed in a van or whatever, this is a related and competing anxiety that I and many others have discussed. So I will try to minimally rehash any Project 2025 stuff here. There are better, more knowledgeable resources for that. I read a little bit of it. It's crazy sauce, completely. Only peaceful planes should be flying over this place. The fact that man's most amazing technology is being used in this horrific way makes me sick. And when I was 9, my pregnant cousin was working in the South Tower of the World Trade Center when her life was cut short by terrorists. We didn't find her body until 3 months later. Meanwhile, my 4 Jewish friends are currently afraid to wear any overtly Jewish accessories, and my Lebanese friend just lost her infant cousin in Beirut. I cannot even imagine the pain of the families of the hostages or the idea of not finding my family member in the rubble of Gaza after all the bombing. Remember, tragedy and mourning are not a contest. To pretend like we who are comfortably able to live and have internet access have all the facts of this horrific war without an investigation by a UN special rapporteur, or can talk down to Jewish or Arab people who are going through this about how they feel, as if cold hard political facts are so easy to put in the forefront of one's mind when you can't go to Israel for your honeymoon or ever talk to your baby cousin again, is the height of hubris. At the same time, it is a war. There has been anti-Semitism, and I will heartily agree with anyone saying that Israel is committing war crimes, but to also ignore the evils of Yahya Sinwar and Hamas, rest in hell, you asshole. While highlighting only Netanyahu's disgusting behavior, or ignore wider geopolitical context and demand that Kamala act differently, then the president is to risk any proposed solutions not working or causing unintended consequences, or its advocates sounding ill-informed. We need to get Kamala in to set the conditions of organizing as well. I'll get to that in a second, but I absolutely support a two-state solution and want to limit weapons to Israel. But in practice, Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah, and the Houthis have also been sending thousands of missiles a day against Israeli civilians. One of the barrages cost $500 million in Iron Dome charges and conventional artillery to defend against, not to mention coordination with the U.S. and allied nations such as Saudi Arabia. If taking away the Israeli weapons resulted in mass casualties because of that, Biden would have looked weak, and then we would have gotten Project 2025. Also, thanks to defense manufacturers putting their locations in multiple states to grab Congress by the short hairs, if any factory shut down, Republicans would immediately jump on that. and gain with the far larger pro-Israel voting bloc. And then we have Project 2025. Slurs and violence in either direction are also counterproductive, and both sides, when the only side we should be on is civilians against madmen, are guilty of poor message discipline, ranging from Palestinian protesters kidnapping a maintenance worker in Columbia University to Israeli protesters destroying the peaceful encampment at UCLA. I kind of wish I went back to American to see what was going on, but I was not sure who to talk to or how to use my voice as an alarm without causing a bunch of upset. Therefore, my approach has been to carefully observe what's been going on while preserving my mental health and researching all perspectives on this issue with all my knowledge and passion for history. From there, I have tried what I could to help where I can. This includes counteracting simplistic narratives on Reddit, admittedly very clumsily at times, but I will explicate my beliefs and thought process if people want to have debates without resorting to ad hominems. Rebutting a very specific piece of misinformation that went viral on TikTok regarding Yemen, essentially that the UN was cutting off Yemen for helping Palestinians, when really it was just too dangerous to get food in there due to the area being mostly controlled by Houthis, and even then, only about 30% of the population was cut off from the World Food Program, but it's still 9 million people. It's just that exaggerating these things doesn't help. Giving more people information on this YouTube channel, History Flights Productions, on how aid was getting to Gaza or not. Like I said, I recommended they donate to World Central Kitchen before... frustrating. They're my favorite charity, and now that they're back a little bit, I'll try to donate to them again soon. But I've donated to them before for federal shutdown, Ukraine, and the pandemic, so I was really, really hoping that would be a consistent option. Anyway, so since the Middle East has been my favorite region to talk about since 6th grade, I'll be making other live streams in the future talking about Palestine before the Arab conquests of 632, and the role of the little-known Baha'i faith in helping the conflict or not. I've also donated 250 meals to International Rescue Committee, and I made the case for Biden's approach in an empathetic way at an open mic before he left the race, for which I was booed. I believe that proves my point about the hollowness of rhetorical kludgeons such as Zionist and Hamas supporter or booing with regards to American discussions regarding this. These are called thought-terminating cliches, and I am so mad at them because there's no argument there. It's just, I don't like you, la 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 la. Why are people just resorting to these all the time? I really do hate that we have to deal with lesser of two evil politics once again this cycle, and have also been disillusioned by a lot of the Democratic Party's concerns and actions. I mean, I got their concerns, and I get that eventually Biden made what is probably the right choice if Kamala gets elected. But it was more so the COVID, over-preparing from his team, and just general tiredness from multiple international flights in a row, which gives Trump no excuse, that made him realize he had to stop. Not any of Nancy Pelosi's veiled speech. And so, did they have to be so defeatist about it? I've registered as an independent this year and voted for Initiative 83 to permit ranked choice voting in open primaries in D.C. With that, I'm going to end the flight portion of this and move on to the part that most people will watch anyway the next day to get the answer, which is part of the problem. The prediction! Diction! Echo! Alright, well, I'm gonna close out of you now. And turn off this. Hang on. 1 second. Okay. That having been done, I am now pulling up 270 to win. Where? Oh wait, hang on. Let me shrink that down a little bit. So, Here we go. Do not watch the cable news channels. They turn this into a clown show, but they get all their information from calls from the Associated Press anyway, and that's free. Secondly, we're not going to know the results for probably 2 weeks, due to the usual suspects. Pennsylvania, Georgia... Oh, wait, hang on. Cancel that. Oop, that fell off. Great. Cool. 1 second. Technical issues. Alright. Okay. Fixed, and here we go. So, we're not going to know the results of the election for 2 weeks due to Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona taking their time to count the votes like usual. As I mentioned earlier, expect Trump to declare fraud based on that and nothing else. I'm only focusing on the presidential race tonight in any detail as well because I can't alter anything from the forecast for the others. It would be a tedious process to fill in the rest now from scratch. So, I'm going to get them out of the way first. The Senate will likely go to the Republicans, who have already won in West Virginia as of now, just because the Democrats must defend more seats this cycle, and only a third in total are up for contention in an increasing... Okay, so... due to the Senate having long 6-year terms. One of them is a moderate Montana Democrat, John Tester, in an increasingly right-wing state where D means do not want to people there, and even with a win in Ohio and an upset in Texas, where Cruz is up by just 1% over Allred, if I recall correctly, leaving the possibility of a blue-wing Texas in 2028. Democrats would need Osborne to win in Nebraska as an independent and caucus with them, which is no guarantee, unlike the independents from Maine and Vermont. That would also make control of the Senate by 1 vote for Democrats again. Meanwhile, in the House, I am worried about Alaska due to Mary Peltola not having the benefit of being a ranked choice underdog this time. And the suburbs of New York and Long Island also seem to be a little bit wavering in Republican directions. But Democrats only need to win 8 undecided seats to win the whole House, while Republicans must win in 11 of them. So the math probably doesn't math for the Republicans, especially after 2 years of incompetence. I mean, seriously, why did we let Congress get away with doing practically nothing for 2 years? But finally, it seems the people are willing to punish them. I also think that there's just more districts here that are closer to Democratic population centers, so those areas are probably going to break Democratic. Maybe here? It looks like Harrisburg, maybe? I'd have to double check. But back to the presidential race. In a lot of states, those are currently a toss-up, as you can see. Early exit polls, however, are breaking Harris in many places to the point where Trump is already talking about cheating in Philadelphia. I mean, again, is anybody surprised that he was going to talk about the election being stolen? The guy is such a loser. Again, he won the Electoral College in 2016. He still talked about Hillary cheating with 10 million illegals, immigrants voting or something like that. It was so stupid. If she actually had 10 million extra people voting for her, she probably would have won the Electoral College. Just because he lost the popular vote, his narcissism is immense. Anyway, my prediction process is simple, if a bit unscientific in this chaotic mess. Assuming all lean or likely states go where they're predicted to, and then giving all the toss-up states to Harris. Nobody can predict how they'll go with certainty, so you might as well flip a coin for each state. But I think that coin might flip to a landslide, and here's why. Due to the distorting effect of the Electoral College, landslides can happen after a few 100,000 votes. That's what happened in 2016. Trump won with 40,000 votes in 3 states, which is about the same as, or just 5,000 less, I think, than the capacity of Nats Stadium in D.C., where the Nationals got creamed when I saw them. Oh, and the double blow of the New York Yankees losing to the Dodgers. That's the real fraud here. No, just kidding. No, the Yankees were just bad. In any case, other than specific factors that could toss Pennsylvania, such as the way the 100,000 Puerto Ricans living there might get mad, which are too granular to get in for me right now, I always thought that Biden would win even if he turned to the main character from Weekend at Bernie's, just because of large and existential issues that are much bigger than any one candidate. The Republic can't do anything right, really, party's much ballyhooed red wave, and failed in 2022 because of democracy and abortion, and it seems like these will be the same factors that keep them down this time. As mentioned, the main thing that changes is the road's advantages in the South. If literally anybody but Trump was running, though, this would be a huge L for Kamala, as Biden has a 40% approval rating with a bad perception on the economy. Usually it's the economy, stupid, and this is something that Trump is strong on despite this, as is immigration, despite his selfish, despite his, for the economy, his tariffs that are going to raise prices by an extra $4,000 a year for most middle-class people. And his immigration stances are also ridiculous, despite his active sabotage of a bipartisan border bill. He somehow is stronger in immigration. That might in part be because of gender, but Hillary also knew all too well how hard it was to present yourself as a change candidate when you worked in the previous administration. And the Brett Baer interview would have had a semi-decent point about why didn't you do this 3 years ago on all our policies, except the alternative is a lying, cheating, 4-time criminal who was found liable for sexual assault. What are we doing as a country if we even let him get close to this? Oh. But she does have way more paths to victory. So what she'll be able to do depends on Congress, and I'll talk about that in my next stream and hopefully final one in January. But even if Trump won all of the southern states that are disputed and Nevada, he would need to, he would need to also win the blue wall, basically, because as you can see, he's still 8 electoral votes short. So, maybe he'd get to 2 away with that. And he was also hoping to get rid of the congressional method for Nebraska, which allocates votes electorally by district, so that he could get all of Nebraska's votes. And then it would be 269 to 269, and then it would toss into the House. The Republican House, even if the Democrats won the House, would have handed the election to him because the House votes by state delegations, not like independently. So Republicans simply have more states under their control, so they would have won. And then the Senate would probably have elected Tim Walz, and then we'd have Trump and Walz. What? That would have been hilarious. That feels like just as bad almost as John Adams becoming the vice president of, as Thomas Jefferson becoming the vice president of John Adams after losing in 1796. And they did not get along together at all. Big surprise. That was back before the 12th Amendment when the runner-up became vice president instead of having separate elections for president and president. And that led to a tie in 1800 between Jefferson and his intended vice president, Aaron Burr, where Alexander Hamilton famously cast his vote in a musical for the tiebreaker. Well, so again, he would have to win at least one state in the blue wall. Despite the determination of the badly organized, uncommitted movement to unleash leopards to eat all of our faces, I think the blue wall will hold. If even one of those falls after a Sunbelt sweep, we're looking at a bad time for Kamala, though. Yeah, that would basically be how Trump would win. And I rate that as a much lower likelihood than a Kamala win, obviously. So, yeah. Let's just hope all that doesn't happen and all the pleas people have made for you to vote get through and you voted for the person who is not going to throw the country into chaos, please? Whatever the case, though, I am so exhausted from this stupid election and I'm going to bed. I need to go into D.C. for work in the morning for my one office day this week. And a bunch of the windows are boarded up and the Secret Service is probably going to lock down the whole block near where I am. Blocks multiple. And you know what I'm going to do tomorrow after making sure there's not a riot and I get back home from my office safely? I'm going to be streaming Call of Duty with my good friend in my pajamas with some hard cider. Going back to writing my steampunk fantasy novel, A Parlay with Silhouette. Going back to reading books instead of worrying about my life or when I'll see the next anti-trans election ad in the World Series. And so much more that I've put aside because I'm afraid of this man. Because like SNL said, we need to keep Kamala and end all the drama. What would you like the power to do if Trump isn't an axe hanging over all our lives? And even if he is still, I will make a plan with my family and friends and worry about it later. You all have a good night.